5 Pacific time. It is 12:05 Eastern time, and it is midnight in Hong Kong, where one of our panelists is joining us. We're so excited to meet all these Canadians leading from far and wide, truly. So thank you so much for joining us again. For those new faces, new names that we're seeing, my name is Laura Buehler. I'm the Executive Director here at C100. I am based in the San Francisco Bay Area, where our nonprofit is headquartered. I'm originally from Alberta, Canada, and have now the pleasure, the dream job of running an organization that is to the service of great Canadians like all of you. So C100, by way of background, is a member-supported nonprofit. Like I said, we're headquartered here in San Francisco. We have members across all the major technology hubs in the US, Canada, and beyond. We aspire to build the preeminent global community of Canadians in tech. Our mission is to support, inspire, and connect the most promising Canadian entrepreneurial leaders. We do that through programs that espouse mentorship, investment, and talent. And our members, who are both individuals and organizations, include some of the most ambitious Canadian founders, operators, and VCs. If that sounds like you and you're interested in supporting our mission as a member and participating in our members program, please do head to the C100 website. Consider applying to join as a member. It supports our work and our unique role in the broader Canadian ecosystem, but more importantly, it will be invested right back into supporting you, the entrepreneurial Canadian, having an impact. Today, it's our honor to host a really interesting discussion about Canadians leading from far and wide. We have a couple of people, Canadians joining us from Hong Kong and from Boulder, Colorado, who are going to share more about what it's like leading startups in different reaches of the world during COVID, and of course, what they see for after COVID. It's also our honor to host one of C100's members, Alex Lazarow, who is originally from Winnipeg, but now calls San Francisco home. I'll introduce Alex before he introduces our two panelists. So Alex has spent his career working at the intersection of investing, innovation, and economic development across public, private, and social sectors. He's a venture capitalist with Cathay Innovation, which does not have a relation to the airline or the bank. It's a global investment firm that invests across Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America. Alex is also an adjunct professor specializing in social impact investment and entrepreneurship at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. Alex's expertise really is quite global in nature. He recently published a book called Out Innovate: How Global Entrepreneurs from Delhi to Detroit Are Rewriting the Rules of Silicon Valley. It was published by Harvard Business Review Press in April of this year, right during the pandemic. Alex is a regular columnist with Forbes, and his writing has been featured in the Financial Times, Harvard Business Review, TechCrunch, VentureBeat, Business Insider, and many others. And so he will be moderating our discussion today, and I'll have him introduce the David Wong and David Brown. Before I pass it off, I just want to give some hygiene and housekeeping for everyone. We will be recording today's session. If you missed any of the prior ones, they are available on the C100 website at thec100.org. Most of them are around the theme of creating a startup playbook in a sudden downturn. We have published not only videos, but some key insights and lists that have come out as insights from those discussions on our website and on our Medium channel as well, ranging from access to capital, adapting your business plan for a recession, and team crisis management. So if you've just arrived, please introduce yourself in the chat. Throughout the conversation, I'll ask that you put questions in the Q&A. You can vote up other people's questions, and the C100 team will be helping to curate those questions for the session. When your question is called, we will unmute you. We'll ask that you announce your name, your firm, and where you're calling in from to keep things personal. But I also ask that you keep your question short and sweet. It's been chosen largely because of its clarity and succinctness, and so that we can keep things moving and make sure to have a really great conversation today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Alex, our moderator today. Alex, thank you so much for spending your time with us and for curating this discussion.
Thank you so much for having me. This topic is obviously really close to my heart and central to the book I just released around global entrepreneurship. I believe that what it takes to scale startups around the world is different than the playbook in the Valley for different contexts. And increasingly, startup best practices coming from leading entrepreneurs and leading ecosystems from Hong Kong to Boulder and everywhere in between. And so with that, I'm really excited to have David and David to join us today for the conversation. What I thought we would do is David Brown leads Techstars, which is one of the world's largest accelerators. David Wong is an entrepreneur, Canadian as well, in Hong Kong, leading a global business. Maybe what we'll do is to start the conversation is I'll ask both of our panelists to introduce themselves, but also, I think the question on everyone's mind right now is COVID and Corona. And what's interesting about this crisis is the way it's manifesting itself in different parts of the world is different. It's at different speeds. And so this is also an opportunity, maybe you could talk in the context of the work, also what you're seeing there and some lessons in these challenging times that you've been learning. And so maybe we'll start that and then we'll take the conversation from there. Maybe we'll start farthest away, David Wong, and we'll pass it to David Brown after.
Okay, thanks so much, Alex. And it's really just really excited to be a part of this. So I'm David. I was born in a tiny little town in northern Alberta, moving to the West Coast when I was about 7 years old. Grew up and I went to school in Vancouver and LA. I've been in Asia for a number of years now. And for me, the attraction for Asia was very much just the growth opportunities that we're seeing in this particular market and just the rapid change. So I'm currently co-founder and CEO of a company called Booqed, which is a digital platform that connects businesses looking for short-term places to meet, work, or have an event, and connecting them with landlords and developers that have unused spaces to basically let out. In terms of what we're seeing from COVID-19, look, I think we all know where this came from, right? It was China. And so we've kind of been on the cutting edge of a lot of this stuff for, I think Hong Kong's been in some measure of lockdown probably since end of January, early February. So, what we're seeing is that things that are happening here are then replicating themselves in some form or fashion in North America and Europe, sort of 60 to 90 days after. So there's a couple of points that I'll just briefly talk about in terms of what we're seeing. Very early on, we were hoping that there might be a V-shaped recovery, right? So early on, it's like people were thinking maybe April would be back to business. I think what we're seeing in Asia indicates that it's not going to be a V-shaped recovery. It's probably going to be not even a U-shaped recovery, but maybe closer to a W-shaped recovery where things bounce back, there's an outbreak or there's a cluster, things get locked down again, and we go on that way until maybe there's general immunity or there's a vaccine that's developed. Secondly, the thing that we're also seeing, and this as startup founders is very, very important, is that things are changing really fast, right? And I'll give you an example, just personal example, where back in March, Hong Kong was pretty much dead. Everything was locked down. Nobody was going out to the streets. We focused on opening up Singapore, growing Singapore, simply because there was just such growth that we were seeing there. Less than a month later, it's completely opposite. So Hong Kong is now opening back up. Singapore is in lockdown. So the one thing I think that the takeaway from this is that things are changing really, really fast. And that is a challenge, even as founders of startups where we are used to rapid change.
David, how about with you? You've got a global ecosystem that you work with. Maybe you talk a little bit about your Canadian heritage, Techstars, and what you're learning as well on the front lines around the world.
Sure. I'll start with the street cred. Born and raised in Montreal, proud Canadian, proud Montrealer. Went to McGill, started lifelong entrepreneur. Went to McGill, graduated mid-80s, 1986, and so I've been in startups since my first year of university when I got a summer job working at a startup and never left. Moved to the United States in 1990, mostly because at that time. Montreal, Canada wasn't as startup friendly as it is today, and sort of fell in love with entrepreneurship and couldn't couldn't find my people in the city that I loved. And that has been a big part of Techstars' mission ever since, right? Is to help grow entrepreneurial ecosystems around the world. Of course, Montreal has a thriving startup ecosystem today. We run an accelerator there, very proud of all the activity that's happening in Montreal. But as we grow and expand, we've popped up 50 accelerators, in different cities all around the world, and have various startup weekend activities in actually 120 countries around the world. And in relation to COVID, it's given us an opportunity to maybe compare and contrast what's happening around the world. I want to start off with what's the same. It is amazing to me that we sort of have this shared experience, right? And that while there might be differences, we can sit here with David in Hong Kong, or we have staff in Seoul or in Bangalore, and really we're talking about the same thing. What's your infection rate? Are you in lockdown? Are you getting your groceries with Instacart? Amazing how all of humanity, 7 billion people, sort of have this shared experience. And while obviously I wish it were under better circumstances, in a way, I think it brings us all together. So that's thing one. Thing two is, I'll echo what David said, is even though the experience is the same, it is different, or at different stages in different parts of the world. And, I'm guessing that most people on this call are somewhere in North America. And even within North America, things are different, right? New York City is not the same as Boulder or Colorado, for sure. But if you look at the experience of how Sweden has been dealing with the pandemic, which is much more open the doors, or you observe what's happening in Seoul or Singapore, it is a window for us in North America to maybe to get a glimpse as to what's coming. Our first experience was running a demo day in Singapore in early February, which went fully virtual. And in the United States at that time, and North America at that time, that seemed, far away and impossible. Then started talking to our teammates in South Korea, and, really learned through that masks were coming at a time that we weren't even really on lockdown yet. We have a program in Italy that was the first to go fully remote, and, sort of got the experience there. So I think it is an opportunity for all of us to learn from each other, not just other states, but other countries, to sort of see what's working and what's not, and used our shared experience to come up with customized solutions that are right for our communities.
I resonate with that. And actually, maybe picking up on what David Wong had talked about with the shape of the reception and recovery, I'd be curious what you're seeing among the global ecosystems where you're working on. Everyone's talking about how VCs are back open for business, but at the same time, people talk about having enough capital to weather the storm. I'd love to hear what you're seeing on that front, and then maybe the tied question is how you expect things will change coming out of the crisis after we come through that.
Hard to say. I'm not an epidemiologist, right? And so whether it's, VU or W-shaped, whether another peak is coming is very, very hard for me to tell. But so I'll leave that to the medical experts. I certainly think it's possible, but at very least, I've for a long time now sort of been describing it as VNU out, in the sense that, we crashed hard. It was almost I in. And, the expression that I'm hearing more and more politicians use, that we're going to sort of return to normal as more of a dimmer than a light switch, resonates to me. I think that's what's going to happen in real life, and that's what's going to happen to the economy too. It's not going to be a rapid recovery, and I think we're in for a long slog for the rest of the year, and I think that's true no matter where you are on the planet.
Yeah, I think that has particular resonance, I think, for startup founders as well. And first thing I'd say is that, just a shout out to the Techstars team, and we are actually a Techstars company, so there's a link there. But, they immediately, I think very early on in the crisis, started putting on webinars for founders, and just putting together resources to help people through that. I mean, for us, I think the major issue is that we don't know how long this is going to last. I mean, things will open up, and nobody really knows where the end point of this. And so, as a founder, I think one of the things that we had to do is take a very hard look at our business and just say, okay, let's run scenarios: 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, assuming that we can't get any revenue, and can we survive that? And so we, as a result, subsequently, we really had to go in and we started cutting costs as much as we could. We took a hard look in terms of our run rates and our expenses, and basically trying to do everything we can to extend that as much as possible. And I think one thing that one of our advisors did share with us is, look, as a startup founder, if we can get through this to the other side, there is a very, very high chance that you're going to be able to be successful in your category, in the category you play in. Being one of the ones that are left standing, I think, for us right now, I mean, candidly, it's about survival, and doing everything we can during this pause, if you will, to make sure that we are building that resiliency and that flexibility in our business.
Yeah. The other bit, we were talking about your work across borders. Seemingly the news is all about how borders are coming down and things are closing up. But at the same time, we read all this encouraging news, like things like the global hack and how cross-border collaboration is bringing us closer to some of the solutions to these challenges. I'd be curious what you're seeing there. You're both running global cross-border organizations. I'd love to hear what you're seeing there and how you think some of that will play out over the long term past the crisis in tech.
Well, it's interesting, right? Like, I think one of the things that I'm not sure is going to ever come back as strong as it was is business travel. Because one of the things that, we're hearing from investors a lot is, wow, I can invest in startups without, going to a meetup, without flying to a demo day, without having to go to my coffee shop and have a cup of coffee, and Zoom has become the new normal. And so in that sense, while borders have closed, they're very porous in the sense that Zoom crosses borders really easily. And, here we are having a call with Canadians, with somebody in Boulder and somebody in Hong Kong, and we can't tell the difference because of the technology. And so I think there is going to be a big shift in how people do business. It's going to require not no in-person meeting, but the need to get on an airplane and go somewhere and meet somebody face to face, I think is going to be drastically reduced as a result of that. And that will have many, many implications on many companies, some positive, some negative, right? Zoom obviously will be a huge beneficiary. The airlines obviously will not.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is, I think there is something that says, at least until, maybe there is a vaccine that's developed, there is an emphasis where I would say, we're already starting to see this out in Asia, it's that there's a bit of a development of, I guess, what I call, micro ecosystems, if you will, right? Because all of a sudden, that business might be dependent on inbound traffic, for example, no longer has that option. So, and the other part for me is that I think increasingly countries are looking at sustainability. So, for example, in the United States, there is talk about reshoring or onshoring, processes that were previously out, in other countries. Great example in Singapore. I think what they've realized is that their whole food chain or food security is at risk, and their goal now is, I think, within a few years to be able to increase so right now 99% of their food is imported. Their goal is to be able to have 30% it's local production, for their population. So, they're definitely, if you're a business like what we're running, where it's very much dependent on sort of business traffic or people meeting, there is going to be an impact, and we need to adjust. But equally, there are opportunities that are opening up for that as well as countries sort of readjust to this new normal.
Yeah, I resonate with that. I feel like I'm a perennial optimist, and I think one of the nice things about this, echoing David Brown, is the great leveling that is happening and making access. But at the same time, I think this in-person connectivity is not going to go away, and I think it's going to manifest itself in different ways. Maybe the other side of the question is not just this global nature of where startups are building, where collaboration is coming from, but it's how people build their teams. And this notion of distributed teams, everyone on my Twitter feeds like showing about their Zoom rigs and et cetera. But in many ways, entrepreneurs around the world have been thinking about building distributed teams for a long time. I'd be curious how you're seeing that play out. what's working, where this kind of evolves, and some lessons learned.
It's interesting for us, right? Because we've had distributed teams from the get-go. We have employees in 24 different countries. And so we've had to learn how to use video conferencing and operate across multiple time zones and understand different cultures. And to us, it feels like we're learning, right? Lots of people are home. I'm working from home. It's an adaptation for me, but I realize that for those that are used to operating in an office environment, it's so much more of an adaptation than those of us that have already had distributed teams. And, you know, we work with a lot of corporate partners, and I was just on a call with one of them earlier this week. And it was funny, right? Because it was a one-on-one call, and I go to my calendar and it's like this conference call number with an 18-digit ID, and you get on the phone and, hey, anybody there, right? Like it was this thing that I had experienced 20 years ago that I think, you know, many of us don't use anymore, right? We're used to Zoom or Hangouts or FaceTime or whatever. And so for big companies, it is a struggle to figure out how to work from home. One of them asked me, can you hire people, you know, when there's not an office? And how do you onboard somebody, or how do you interview somebody that you've never met? And then how do you know that they're really working? Like these, it's not just about Zoom, it's about the cultural norms to figure out how to run a distributed organization. And I think startups in many ways have a huge leg up because most of us have been doing some version of that for a long time versus big companies that are just for the first time, you know, trying to figure out how to allow people to work from home offices.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. What I'd add to that, I think, and there's, you know, I think the on top of that, I think there's certain cultures where I think being at the office is kind of expected, right? And I would say, you know, Hong Kong probably falls into that. There's generally more work from home, partly because flats are really, apartments are small, and so people, you know, they expect to be in the office as well. So I think there is a bit of an adjustment that's happened as people are being forced to work from home. From our team perspective, what we found was, and we've sort of taken specific steps to try to make sure that they don't lose that personal interaction, or that we're taking steps to make sure that we're strengthening our culture, and that's harder to do, I think, when you're, at least for me, I find that harder to do if everybody is remote. But certainly what we're doing is we've gone completely virtual. Part of this was the cost cutting measures that we took to make sure that we could extend our runway. So we've given up our offices. All our teams right now are working from home. But what we do is that once a week, you know, if for example, in Hong Kong, we'll get everybody together. And so we have that sort of personal interaction, because there's a lot that you can do, you know, just sitting in the same room as somebody else that you might not be able to do being remote. At the same time, we'll do kind of fun games like every Friday, and this is actually suggested by somebody from our team, where we will actually do a Zoom, basically team building session. So last week, every Friday, we do that, and last week we did a you know, Pictionary on Zoom, which was kind of fun. But equally beyond the fun, it's about getting to know more about each other. So we will also do exercises where we just kind of get more familiar with each other, so we don't lose that aspect of it.
Yeah, in some ways, working remote lays bare some challenges in your culture, and so you actually have to be more intentional about how you build it, and how you think about hiring, how you think about retention, how you think about internal communications. And so I really resonate with that. The other question, you know, David Wong, you talked about Singapore and how they're rethinking questions of national strategy, et cetera. I think there's kind of this other question around startup ecosystems as well, and like how do we make startup ecosystems sustainable and resilient over time? We've had this incredible proliferation, you know, over 1 million startups around the world and 480 startup hubs. You know, how do we keep those things alive, and how does that play out through the crisis and hopefully beyond with continued flourishing? What are your thoughts working around the world?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. I think certainly we see very flourishing startup ecosystems in Singapore. Hong Kong is growing quite rapidly. China, obviously, there's India, there's very large and thriving communities there. I would say, I guess a couple of things come to mind. And first would be a shout out to organizations like C100 and Techstars, where bringing together people in forums like this to be able to share knowledge and to be able to share information and how other companies or other founders are dealing with that and some of the challenges. I think that's very, very important. And I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, for us, we've gotten immense amounts of great advice from being part of the Techstars community. The second thing, though, is, look, I think, and I don't want to throw this on the government, but I do think that government, especially in a VUCA time, high volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, this is where governments do have to play a role. And so one of the things that we are seeing in Asia, and I know in Canada there's been grants for small businesses that have been launched as well. But for example, in Hong Kong, there's been programs where you can apply for certain grants for market expansion or market plans or certain development plans. There are programs where we can apply for salary concessions and to be able to help us through that. So I do believe that government also has a role to play, but I think what I would say is it mostly lies at the feet of other founders, us as founders, or us as people in the startup ecosystem, where so some of the things that we've been doing is we've actually been running webinars of our own, trying to deal with and reach out to specific communities where they have questions about how to navigate through this crisis. We've been spending a lot of time trying to mentor others in the prop tech community, which is where we're at, to be able to answer some of their questions and to be able to work with them. So I would say that those are the three things that would come to my mind, in terms of how we can strengthen and help build resilience in the local startup communities that we operate.
And how about with you, David Brown?
Well, what struck me as you were asking the question is how entrepreneurs are needed more than ever, right? The world gets turned upside down through an event like coronavirus, and we have all kinds of new problems, right? Home grocery delivery scaling up, figuring out how to once and for all get rid of cash, figuring out how to be able to have a remote workforce. All of these creates opportunity. All of the change creates opportunity and creates gaps that entrepreneurs, are there to help solve. And so there will be incredible startups that get created as a result of this. Furthermore, the studies have all shown that in a recession or coming out of a recession, all job creation gets created by new enterprises. And so there will be massive unemployment. There already is, but these new ventures that in many cases have yet to be created are going to wind up hiring lots and lots of people and putting people back to work. And so while we're all sort of eager to get out of the home and have life get back to normal, I am optimistic about the future, that it is a great opportunity for entrepreneurs and for startups to be able to make a meaningful difference in improving the world.
Yeah, and in many ways, coming out of the crisis, we're laying bare some of the biggest challenges that are also in many ways big market opportunities to be solved.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask the panelists one more question around just one piece of advice that they have for founders around the world and in Canada on how to do that. But maybe just one more reminder for folks that are listening to put any questions you have in the Q&A. And then we'll shift to that part of the conversation right after this. But just one last piece of parting advice that you'd share with founders.
Hang in there, right? Do what David is doing, right? Preserve your runway or extend your runway, preserve your cash. Think about how your company will look, when we all leave our homes. It doesn't apply to everybody. Obviously, there are some businesses that are just exploding, Zoom, Netflix, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, Instacart are all doing very, very well and are preserving cash. They're hiring as fast as they can. But for many businesses, we all have to think about what is life like when revenues dry up and funding becomes harder, and how are we going to survive this? And as David was saying earlier, there's a big prize for those that make it out to the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would echo what David said, and also I think what our advisor shared with us, which is, look, goal here is it is survival, right? And you do whatever it takes to survive. Once you can make it to the other side, then there's some massive opportunities that are there, but it is getting to the other side, and that's the trick, right? So definitely, I would say that would probably be the one thing that I've learned, out of everything, the one thing that I want to share with the group.
Yeah. And speaking of getting to the other side, we are getting to the other side of this conversation. I think with this, I'll transition it to Laura, who will moderate some of the Q&As that's been coming in. And thank you for everyone suggesting some questions and next topics.
Okay, thank you both so much for your honesty. We actually do have a few questions coming in. As a reminder, we're going to find you and unmute you. And so if you could just introduce yourself and where you're calling in from, and then read off your question. If it's directed to one person, feel free to say that as well. So we're first going to go over to Alan Hamid. And while we find you, Alan, there you are. Alan, you're live. I don't know if we can hear you yet. Okay, we are having trouble hearing Alan, but I will read off his question unless, oh. Okay, well, Alan, we're having some trouble hearing you. You are unmuted, but I'll read your question. I'm not sure where Alan is calling in from, but his question is this: while most of the businesses are gravitating towards remote work, using tools like video conferencing, etc., have you noticed a trend among VCs and angels specifically for raising seed capital? And I'll just tell our panelists that this is a question I think that's on a lot of people's mind right now. Can you raise capital over Zoom and video conference, basically?
Short answer is yes. David mentioned earlier some of the resources that Techstars has put out in terms of answering questions. They're available to everyone at techstars.com/COVID. 80% of the questions that come in are around fundraising. And so specifically on this one, the answer is yes. VCs typically have capital that they want to and need to invest. They've not only discovered that they can do it over Zoom, they've discovered that they prefer, in many cases, to do it over Zoom. Cuts down on travel time, cuts down on expense. It's a much, much more efficient use of time. So I would not hesitate to switch to video on everything that you used to do in person with respect to fundraising.
Maybe just building on what David said. Well, I'm actually working on my first Zoom only deal. I do think that, long term, right now we're in the eye of the crisis, and I think people are going to do Zoom only deals. I think long term, there is some value of the personal relationship. The average venture relationship is longer than the average American marriage. And so I think having long-term alignment with your investors and board members is really important. But I think much more of that can be done virtually. So I do think there's still going to be room for in-person long-term. But I think I totally agree with David that more of it upfront can be done virtually.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add on that is just, look, I think the perception is, with COVID-19, nobody's doing deals. And what we're seeing, I think, especially in the early stages, maybe there was, we were hearing how investors were saying, no, we're not going to look at this. But, I think we're, as Alex, you said, we're kind of in the eye of the crisis now. And this has been going on for a while. I think people are kind of realizing, look, life does go on, and there are still deals to be done. We have had a number of investors calls all over Zoom, and people are in Asia are willing to deploy cash. So, I think that's continued. I think for me, the crisis is actually an opportunity, but I think the timing is key. I think really early on, everybody's distracted. They're worried about, what they're going to do, getting food or whatever the case may be. But now I think people are it's sort of almost like it's the new normal. And now, we're having those discussions again.
Thanks, David and David. Our next question is sort of a follow-up to this. Moving over to Sean Langdo from Global Talent Accelerator. Sean's a C100 member hiding out in Whistler.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, David. Yeah, this is a question because a lot of the time you're betting as much the entrepreneur and the gut feel around that entrepreneur as the business itself. So the jockey versus the horse. And how, in your opinion, has Zoom interviews, et cetera, impacted your ability to get that gut feel?
I would say, like our managing directors are the ones picking the companies, so it's more anecdotal than firsthand knowledge. But I would say it is harder. There's no doubt that meeting somebody in person is a benefit. I totally agree that we're betting on the jockey, not the horse. But with Zoom, you get to meet way more jockeys than you would if you're meeting in person. And in many ways, that levels the playing field for people who might not be able to come visit you where you live. And so I think there's benefits as well. But yes, I would say there is a degradation on sort of the assessment of the person over Zoom. And that's why I agree with what Alex said before. It's not that in-person never has a place anymore, right? We will return to in-person. It may just not be as much as before.
So we actually had a second question from Sean as well. So Sean, we're gonna try to keep you live here to ask your other question or comment.
All right. So what was the question? Oh yeah. So between all panelists, we all know generally we're adjusting to the bigger picture of video conferencing and distributed workforce, et cetera. What anecdotally have you seen, which is the best tweak to tactics or activities related to perhaps in business adjustments to the sales process or the customer service and acquisition, or the team in optimizing its collaboration? Just not the big picture, but a specific anecdote that you thought was pretty innovative.
Zoom tricks?
Yeah, something like that.
You know, mine is don't forget to be personal, right? Like I think it's really hard when you jump on a call with somebody and it's right to business and their kids are in the background or their dog jumps up on their lap. We're all living with a new normal. And to me, more important than ever to have a personal connection with the person that you're talking to if you're meeting them for the first time or if you know them well. And I think that's a benefit, right? That we don't always get when we're, all business because we're in the office.
Yeah, and that's a really great question. I think mine is a version of David's as well, where I think for me, it's not necessarily a Zoom trick, but I think it's just more of a habit that we've gotten into because everything is remote. But really, we've gotten into the habit and we're trying to encourage our team to over-communicate. And over-communicate means, so I'll say from an investor standpoint, I'm reaching out to my stakeholders on a regular basis once a week, right? Whereas before it was once a month. Just, even if I don't have a lot to say or just kind of, hey, just checking in with them, making, and it's that chance to kind of really engage. Same with our clients, right? So, especially now where everybody's kind of in a bit of an adjustment mode, when we have a client opportunity, really just trying to not saturate them, because I think that's irritating, but certainly it's sort of maybe on a weekly basis, just checking in with them, seeing how things are, just getting updates there. So for me, it's more not so much necessarily a Zoom trick, but I think it's just how we use it. And for me, I think it's just that regular check-in and that communication, which is very important.
Thanks for that to both of you. Our next question goes over to Remy Schmaltz. And Remy, can you just introduce yourself, tell us where you're calling in from, and then ask your question, which I think is for David Brown, but it may be for everyone.
Yeah, good morning. Remy Schmaltz, CEO of Decisive Farming, calling in from Sean's rival location, which is Banff, Alberta. And my question is, for David Brown, in terms of, in general, what's been the impact of COVID-19 when it comes to startup valuations, that are raising capital right now? I know you touched earlier on a bit of the access to capital of things being on hold, but just wanted to hear your thoughts more on that.
Sorry, muted myself there. First of all, I just want to say I'm very jealous of people calling in from Banff and Whistler, two of my favorite places. I'll give you a hint on startup valuations and you can guess the result. They're not going up. And I think that's just the reality of the world, right? And it has nothing to do with COVID. It has to do with recession. And we were overdue. It happens in any financial downturn that there's a market correction, not just in the stock market, but in private company valuations as well. And I think you should expect to, if you're Zoom or you're Netflix and you're exploding, sure, they may go up. But under normal circumstances, you should probably expect a 25% haircut on whatever you were thinking 2 months ago.
Alex, is that consistent with your perspective as well?
It's interesting. So absolutely, I think, valuation is a result of the market. But I actually do think there's always been this tale of haves and have-nots, where startups in certain segments that were hot or certain or that happened to be based in certain places where there was a lot more capital enjoyed higher valuation than others. I think we're going to see it play out a little bit differently, where some sectors that are going to be more directly affected or have a fundraising cycle where they need to raise right now, I think are going to have a harder time than others that are able to delay fundraising until there's a little bit less uncertainty in the market, or are in kind of other sectors that might benefit from it, or have longer term contracts, that kind of thing. And so I think the way it'll play out, at least that we're seeing it a little bit at the later stage, is it kind of depends where some rounds are getting done and continue to be moving, perhaps not as quickly or that you might have expected before, but still getting done and still getting some markup. So it's dependent, but definitely agree with the macro perspective.
Thanks to both of you. For those of you listening, we have actually collected the insights from all of these calls on issues of raising capital, valuations, etc. in a single Medium post. You can find that on our website, and I think we'll also Josh has also put the link here for all attendees there in the chat in case that's of interest. So next, we're going to go over to one of our C100 charter members based here in the Bay Area. Chris Albinson has a 2 or 3-part question. So we'll just keep you unmuted for a little bit here, Chris, while you ask your question.
Hey, Laura. Good to see everyone. Alex, great session. Thanks for pulling us together. Sort of on a related topic, in North America anyways, we're seeing something a little bit different in this cycle, in the sense that one of the big sources for venture capital firms to fund startups has been large endowments like universities. In this cycle, those endowments not only seem to have a denominator effect, meaning the amount that they can put in private equity versus where the public market is not in line with their target, but large endowments like University of Michigan, University of Chicago, because of the losses from their hospital systems, are need to pull out $500 million to $1 billion plus out of their endowments just to fund operations. So in the downstream effect of the VCs don't get capital from the normal sources, makes it harder for them to fund new things and tend to focus just on a few companies that they think have a chance to survive. My long-winded preface, but my question is, are you seeing things similarly in Asia and outside of North America? And I'll go on mute.
That's a really good question. David, I don't know whether you have any sort of deeper insights. I need to think about this one.
I mean, I would say, unfortunately, right, this is part of our shared experience, right? The capital markets are going to be harder, right, as funding sources from LPs going into venture funds are being a little more careful with the funds that they deploy, or have a little less to deploy than they previously did, as Chris said. And it's, I think there's two impacts. The short-term impact is those capital markets are a little frozen while everybody figures out what the new normal looks like. And the long-term effect is they won't be frozen, would be my guess, but they will be smaller, which means funds will be harder to come by. And capital markets will be funding fewer companies or with fewer dollars than they used to. And I don't think that's unique to North America. I think that's true around the world.
I think just obviously, look, I think the money for say VCs in Asia are coming from different sources, right? I don't think, university endowments aren't sort of, such a big thing necessarily in Asia. Obviously, a lot of the LPs will be, for example, large families, right? Family money, family offices that are putting money in and whatnot. But I think the concept or the underlying assumption is the same, which is, look, if you're taking a hit in your real estate holdings or your asset values have declined, you're going to be less inclined to deploy capital and invest. And so, or you become more picky in terms of the types of opportunities that you do invest in. So I do think that the broad principle is the same.
It's interesting, like the macro tailwinds on this are still pretty interesting over the long term, right? Like venture capital and startups have provided really strong returns, often in many ways a little bit uncorrelated, particularly early stage to public markets. It's kind of a growing asset category. So perhaps there's kind of this long-term tailwind. And I think the question is what happens, in this eye of the storm in the immediate short term and how that plays out. Where I resonate with David and David. But the source of capital piece is interesting because the U.S. endowment system is germane to the U.S. market. It's very different in Europe and Asia as well. So.
One thing, if I could add on that as well, and I think just a sort of personal anecdote, right? Where look, for us, a number of our stakeholders are actually from Korea, and one of our advisors is from Korea as well. And we've been discussing obviously in terms of in this situation fundraising strategies, and I think what we're hearing back, and again, this is anecdotal and specifically to Korea, but people are very distracted. They are they're holding on to their cash more tightly. They're not willing necessarily to invest at this time. So, or they're being much more choosy in terms of what they do invest in. So definitely there is an impact on
that. Thanks to all of you. The next question I think might be our last. We'll see if we have room for one or two more, but this question is probably one for both the Davids, but I think we should start with David Wong because it is about real estate and workplace strategy. It comes from Jim Wilson. And Jim, just introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks very much for taking my question and for the panelists for sharing their thoughts and their time. It's greatly appreciated. I do a lot of mentoring of startups in the Waterloo area here in Ontario and the Ontario Life Sciences Quarter. And the thought on a lot of the minds of startups is, what am I going to do about real estate? And right now what I'm telling people is wait, don't do anything, because we think there's going to be a surge in opportunity for tenants that doesn't exist at the moment. My question for the panelists is, what, if anything, is going to change for you from a workplace strategy standpoint in response to COVID-19?
Yeah, that's actually really core to our business, and we've been having a lot of existential discussions about that. Look, I think let me talk about this from what we're doing as Booqed, but also what we're seeing in the broader marketplace and how we're addressing this with our clients. So we've gone totally virtual. We've gone totally work from home, and part of this was a very much a cost-driven decision. But also, look, if you're in lockdown, it doesn't make sense to be paying for an office, right? So there was a lot of financial decisions behind that. However, I think moving forward, I think how this is shaping our strategy going forward. Look, we probably will. Our intention is, I think, within the next 90 to 120 days, is go back into co-working, and there's a couple of reasons for that, right? It allows us a lot of flexibility for change because you don't have to get stuck into long-term contracts. Equally, we can upsize, we can downsize as the needs come. So for us specifically, as a startup, that's something that we're looking at. Now, what we're seeing in the broader market, I think, is broadly echoed, because look, I think for me, and maybe I'm sort of a bit old school, is that look, happy to do virtual, but the human interaction that you get from being face to face just is not something that is so easily replaced. You lose all sorts of just that water cooler conversation, so to speak, right? And so what we're seeing, whether it's smaller clients or even larger clients, is that there is going to be a shift away from traditional office leases and getting stuck in terms of that long-term lease towards a much more broad-based approach, right? So we've had clients who say, look, we're going to be doing a mix of, we'll keep a smaller office. We're going to have people working from home in shifts. We're going to be having, co-working and perhaps even different co-working spaces as part of business continuity. So what we're seeing, I think, is a move away from that traditional view of an office or a workspace into something which is going to be a lot more flexible and take into account the whole social distancing and sort of health or hygiene requirements that these companies are looking for to protect their teams.
Thanks so much, David. So we're going to call it there because we're just a couple minutes away from the top of the hour here. I want to thank you, David Wong, especially for how late it is in Hong Kong, joining us. David Brown, for all of your wisdom and stories and transparency. And of course, Alex Lazarow, thank you so much for preparing such thoughtful questions for this. As a little token of our gratitude, C100 is making a modest contribution to a local small business or COVID-related charity of your choice. Could you each just tell us which organization, whether it's a local taqueria or a community-based nonprofit, you have chosen?
I can head off on that maybe. So yeah, look, the charity that that I have in mind, it's called Hope of the City. It's based out of Hong Kong, and what they're doing is they're actually working in some of the poorest districts of Hong Kong, working with with people in need and everything from working in education, to food distribution to the needy, working with the elderly, just having people spend time with them. And so especially in this time where where I think social distancing is causing actually real problems, especially in certain segments of the community, they're playing a vital role in actually helping to bridge that gap. So really pleased that you can support them that way.
Thank you so much. We're so grateful for the opportunity to pay it forward. David Brown, how about for you?
I'm going to go in a different direction since you didn't specifically say a charity. I live in the same house for the last 20 years. I've gone to the same barber for the last 20 years. I know him well. I remember how hard it was for him to pay his rent and keep his small business afloat. And my heart goes out to him because I have no idea. He should be able to open up this weekend, but I have no idea if he's going to be able to survive it. So Alpine Barbers, I'd love to see him.
Alpine Barbers.
Yes, in Boulder.
Wonderful, great.
Yeah.
Let's. We're going to try to get a gift card for you.
That's awesome.
Thanks, and Alex.
I hope and I'll go a totally different direction too. In spirit of what's that?
I was going to say I hope to be able to deliver to him in person soon.
I'll go a different direction as well. And in the spirit of what we were talking about before around Zoom hacks and human connection, I think one area that my wife and I are really passionate about are the arts. And there's an organization called Z Space in the Bay Area, which is a community arts organization that puts on both local productions, but also kind of is very, very creative. And so that's the one that's in the mission that I'll promote.
Wonderful, lovely. Thank you so much. So we're going to close off our discussion there. Again, everyone stay tuned for the email later this afternoon. You will be receiving some resources and links discussed in the call, a recording of today's call, and actually we'll also include contact information for David Brown, David Wong, and Alex Lazarow in case you want to follow up and get in touch. And last but not least, I want to thank all the C100 members involved in today's discussion. It's incredible to see so many faces that we recognize. And again, if you are interested in C100 membership, head to our website at thec100.org. Thank you all so much and take care.